I want to thank you for joining me on my YouTube channel. Now, many of you know that many of our Manifest programs are taped in the Holy Land, Israel and Jordan. And most of you who keep up with us enjoy those programs so much. So we've had so many questions related to why is there such difficulty with certain groups connected to the Jewish people and connected to the nation of Israel. And it is based on a scripture that I want to give you, Zechariah 12, 2-4. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. That's the King James. Other translations say a cup of drunkenness. To all the surrounding people when they shall lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone, or the King James says a burdensome stone for all people who will heave against it, or all who will heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth gather against it. Now that last phrase, all nations of the earth gathering against it, refers to Revelation 16, where he gathers the nations for the battle of Armageddon, which is the valley of Jezreel, a 200-mile square valley in the center part of Israel. It's mostly farming land, but this is where the last battle, called the mother of all battles, will take place. So give me a few moments and I want you to watch all this video. It's important you watch everything, even the conclusion, and something I'm going to be telling you about in just a moment. All right. Let's go back to the year 70 AD when the Romans came into the city of Jerusalem. And you can see Jerusalem on the map right there. See it right here, the city of Jerusalem. And the city of Jerusalem is where the temple was, and the Romans were trying to stop a Jewish revolt, but they were also after the treasures of the temple, which were the gold vessels, because they were going in very heavy debt, handling all the wars and occupations of the country. So Jerusalem was destroyed. The Jewish people were then taken captive and actually removed from their land. And the Romans, of course, took many of them to the city of Rome, made them slaves. Now, at that moment, a year later, this territory, known as Israel, a biblical name, was called Palestine. Now, they get that word from the word Philistine, but they also get it from Philistia, which is an Old Testament name recorded in the book of Isaiah. From that moment on, the Romans also changed the city of Jerusalem, and it was no longer known as Jerusalem. It was given a Roman name. And from 70 AD all the way to about 1948, this entire territory that you're looking at here that has the name Israel on it, all this within blue was known as Palestine. And so when you hear people in Israel who are Palestinian people, and these are individuals who lived in the land before 1948, and their families lived in the land, and they are descendants of those people. So the Arab people, and many of the Arab Christians, and many of the Arab Muslims, of course, consider this area Palestine. Now, there are a lot of people who live in the territory of modern Israel, not Gaza or not the West Bank. And these individuals who are in this territory, many of the Arabs and Arab Christians and Arab Muslims are Israeli citizens. So they are considered to be Israeli citizens. However, their controversy is in the Gaza Strip and also the territory known as the West Bank. And I could make this real long, but I'm going to make this as short as possible, hopefully to help you understand. Now, in 1917, at the end of World War I, a Jewish chemist helped the British to actually supply them with ammunition and came up with an ammunition source for gunpowder because the British were running out of gunpowder. And they asked him, is there anything we can do for you? And he said, I would like for you to open up an opportunity for my people, the Jewish people, to go back and form a homeland in Palestine. And that's when 1917, the Balfour Declaration given by Lord Balfour was given, giving Jewish people access back to what was then called Palestine. And I don't want you to go on here and say there's no such thing as Palestine, or I'm trying to give you the history of it because I know this is controversial between the Jews and Arabs, Messianics, Christians, and all that. I'm giving you history, and I want you to pay attention to the historical part of this. So not too many Jews returned because this whole territory was basically swampland and desert. It was not anything like you see today when you go on a Holy Land tour, for example. Now, things began to shift in 1948 because in 1948, this entire territory, and this part here was under the territory of Jordan, what is called the West Bank area. East Jerusalem was annexed. The country of Jordan actually controlled the area. So what they did in 1948, the United Nations partitioned Palestine. And you read about this in history. So they gave the Jewish people a big section of this area where they could return and come back to. Now, why did they do that? Because the Holocaust cost the life of 6 million Jews. And at that particular time, around 1947-48, the world had great pity toward the Jewish people, and they had nowhere to go. Their homes had been destroyed. The war had destroyed their homes. They had, they wanted to get out of Europe, basically. So many of them took ships and went to this territory after May 14th, 1948, where David Ben-Gurion announced that this area that had been annexed would not be called Palestine or Judah or Philistia. It would be called Israel, which is the actual name. This is amazing to me. It's the actual name that the biblical prophets said would be the name of this area in the last days when the Messiah would come. And so many of these early Jewish people that returned had a knowledge of Scripture and knowledge of the prophecies. In 1948, however, Nasser in Egypt, and Egypt is actually located in this direction here, but really had an animosity toward the Jewish people, toward this reestablishment of a Jewish state. So in 1948 and 49, 1956, 1967, Nasser initiated wars against Israel, and miraculously, Israel would begin to win those wars. And so there was, from that moment on of 1948, when they became a nation again, there were people in the Arab world that felt like that the Jews had no right to the land, that they were occupying land. So you still hear today about what some people in this part of the world, and even in the United States and in Europe, say occupation, occupied land. And when they say occupied land, what they are referring to is that all of this area that is now Israel originally was Palestine, was originally Christian and Arab, Christian and Muslim. So the Jews took it over. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm telling you that's what people believe who are a part of this conflict that we're talking about here for just a moment. And I know I'm going to go a lot longer than I want to, but I hope you watch all of this and to hear what's being said. So from 1948 to 1967, Israel fought numerous wars with Syria, but mainly with Egypt. And in 1967, the country of Jordan was pulled into the war because Nasser, who was the president of Egypt, threatened King Hussein of Jordan with assassination. And I've read the papers on this if he did not support the 1967 war. But what happened in the 67 war is Israel preempted an airstrike and destroyed the Egyptian Air Force. And then the tanks, the Russian tanks that had been purchased by the Egyptians started moving up into this area. And Nasser had a big propaganda thing going on that they're going to push the Jews into the sea. They're going to liberate the nation. So what happened was in the war, there were a lot of people who called themselves Palestinians who began to flee up into Lebanon because there was a huge battle here. So they're getting out of the places they live and they're crossing the border into Lebanon for safety. A lot of people in this direction here that were Arabs, and this did include Muslims and some Arab Christians, some of them, they fled across the Jordan River here into the country of Jordan. Okay, now watch what happens because I'm trying to help you understand the present day conflict. So what took place at that point was when the war ended, the 6-day war ended, Jerusalem was reunited from the east side, which was Jordan, west side, which was the Jewish section. They tore the wall and the barrier down, and it became the capital of Israel in the eyes of the Jewish people, in the eyes of those who understood biblical prophecy, etc. And so there were people in Lebanon now and in Jordan, and they blocked them from coming back in. And so refugee camps were set up in Jordan. There's huge refugee camps in Jordan, set up, some of them up in Lebanon, etc. A big refugee camp was set up here in Gaza Strip. And this starts in 1967. So in 1973, there's another war to try to quote unquote liberate Israel, liberate what they call, and this is in the Arab world, Palestine from the Jewish people. That war looked like it was going to succeed, but it failed. It's called the Yom Kippur War. And you got to remember that during some of these wars, Israel gained all of this territory. I mean, it was just a lot of things happening as far as the land and the territory was concerned. So when that war ended, what you have had presently is you've had the Gaza Strip, you've had all this area here, which is called Israel, considered to be Israel. And of course, they consider the Gaza Strip Israel. I'm talking about the Israeli government. Then you have this whole area called the West Bank. So on the news, when you hear about Gaza, it's this area. When you hear about the West Bank, it is this area which is on the west side of the Jordan River. The Jordan River runs right through here, right in this direction where this blue line is. And so the controversy that you're now seeing is with three different groups. And I'm going to try to explain these as quickly as I can. There's a group in Gaza, as you know from the news, which is called Hamas. Hamas is a military, there's actually several branches to Hamas. One branch is a political branch, a military branch, and the religious branch, but they kind of work together. And this is where you have seen over the years a lot of rockets that have been shot into parts of Israel at different times. They call a ceasefire, then more rockets come in. They call a ceasefire, more rockets come in. And this has been going on for years. And up in the northern area is a group called Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is very complicated because they are backed by Persia or Iran. And so the Hezbollah is in Iran, but basically is a Shia group. There's Sunnis and Shia in the Islamic religion. So you have a lot of Christians in Lebanon, or you used to have a lot of Christians in Lebanon, and then there was a lot of Sunni Muslims. So they moved in there with the help of Iran. And so that Hezbollah is a very big stronghold up here in what we call the northern border of Israel and the area of Lebanon. Now, you've got Gaza Strip, and this is what you see on the news. You hear about the Gaza, you'll hear about Hezbollah, but you also have what's called the Palestinian Authority. They used to be called the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They changed the name after the death of Yasser Arafat to the Palestinian Authority. And they have a lot of control now over what is called the West Bank area. And that has come through peace negotiations and agreements. But what has happened is anytime you have an uprising or you have major protests or you have maybe rockets coming in from Gaza, you seem to have this group, which is Hamas, this group, which is Hezbollah, and a lot of the Palestinian authorities sort of working together. Now, the good part about all of this is there are surrounding nations that are predominantly Muslim nations and Arab nations, and they're the sons of Ishmael, if you look at the scripture, that are beginning to make peace with Israel for economic purposes. Now, they know some of the Gulf states will be running out of oil in a few years. And they know that they're going to have tourism. They're going to have to open up their borders. They know they can't live in that, we would say, the old way of thinking, and the world is new. I mean, you know, you've got down there in Kuwait, you've got down there in Qatar, you've got Bahrain, you've got all these areas, Dubai, which is this modern multi-billionaires and millionaires that come there from all over the world. People from America own apartments there who are millionaires. And so the world is beginning to change, and there are certain nations that are making negotiations with Israel. It started under President Trump, where 4 nations made peace negotiations, and others that were already on the table have been talking to Israel. Now, that's the positive part. So what I'm trying to say to you is this, and we could go into this is so complicated. A lot of it becomes very convoluted, but I want to help you understand what the conflict's about. It's about 2 things. Number one is the belief from, let's say most of your groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, many people with the PLO, that this territory, which is to them called Palestine, is being occupied by Israel and the Jews, and they want them out. That's what a lot of the rocket fire and the battle in these areas is about. Number 2, and this is the big one, and this is prophetic, is the city of Jerusalem. That these particular groups believe that the city of Jerusalem was originally occupied by the Muslims, and that the West and the British and America helped form Israel, and that Jerusalem should be the capital of the Palestinian state. So the battle is for them to take and form what's called a Palestinian state, either inside of Israel, where they have their own autonomy, their own government, their own military, etc. But the problem you've got is, here's the West Bank where they want to form the state, but then the Gaza is here. So how do you get the Gaza Strip area to connect to this? And that's what I'm saying. It just gets very, very convoluted. But my point I want to make is, being someone who studied Bible prophecy for over 45 years, that Jerusalem is going to become a center of attention, that Israel's going to become a center of attention, and this part of the world is going to become the center of attention prophetically for the last days. So when you see a lot of activity happening in this part of the world, then remember, it's all prophesied that this is where the very end of the end will happen, and Jesus Christ will one day return to the city of Jerusalem, to the Mount of Olives, where the mountain is going to cleave in two parts, one part to the east, one part to the west. So this is the land of prophecy. There will be a lot on the news about this land, the people of this land, whether they be Christians, Arab Christians, Muslims, Jews. It's going to happen in the time of the end. This is where the activity is going to be. So in closing, let me just say that you pray for the peace of Jerusalem, they shall prosper that love thee. Now, listen to me carefully. Sooner or later, a man called the Antichrist with his 10 kings will come into this part of the world. And I want you to understand this. So many people have never heard this teaching. So many people do not understand what the Scripture teaches for thousands of years about this man that's coming at the very end of days to form an eighth empire and an eighth kingdom that will impact the entire world. That's why I spent years studying this and did a DVD series, which is 8 hours in length. We'll show you that at the end. But give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and watch what you're about to see, because I want you to get more teaching on this subject. I hope I've done it justice. It's so complicated. It would take hours to teach it in details, but I wanted to kind of give you an understanding that it's a conflict over the land and who is supposed to actually be the owner of the land. And that's where the conflict, according to Scripture, would happen at the end of days. But the Bible's amazing. Get into it. You might be surprised what you discover. Thank you for your time.
Now available is Perry Stone's latest DVD series, The Antichrist, His Confederacy, and the World's Final Eighth Empire. This new 8-hour expanded and detailed DVD teaching will explain the empire that will seize the world in the future. This teaching will unlock the final mystery of the Antichrist. In this series, Perry will explain where the theory of the Antichrist originates in Scripture, what the prophets, Christ, and the apostles taught about the Antichrist, the early fathers' teachings about the Antichrist, the men in history who were candidates for the Antichrist, the major prophecies concerning the Antichrist kingdom and his 10 kings, the role Islam has in the future 8th kingdom. Discover the area the Antichrist comes from, where he rules, and what he will do. Learn details of the mark and image of the beast and global economic control. You will also discover numerous prophetic insights seldom known that are now revealed. This study will answer hundreds of your questions. It also includes word studies, amazing history, and combines Old and New Testament prophecies to give a clear understanding of this subject. These 4 DVDs, approximately 8 hours of teaching, has numerous pictures and charts. This DVD series is Manifest Offer AK139 and is available for a gift of just $65 or more. To order, visit perrystone.org or call toll-free 1-888-21-BREAD. That's 1-888-212-7323. You may also write to us and send a check or money order to Perry Stone Ministries, P.O. Box 3595, Cleveland, Tennessee 37320, and request offer number AK139. This offer is available on television for a limited time, so we look forward to hearing from you soon.